Hi, my name is Cinnamon Roll, and I'm converting a school bus into my full-time home. If you're new here, welcome, and if you're returning, welcome back. So remember in last week's video where I made this tape template? Yeah, it rained and all of the tape started to fall apart. I thought maybe I could fix it, but it was a lost cause. So when my brother and I did the roof raise, we left this front section overhanging so that there would be a little bit of protection from rain. But it was in the way for what I had planned next, so it had to go. Before I put any sheet metal up, I had to put in some support pieces. These were for a little extra structural integrity and would stop the roof from extending and retracting every time I hit a bump. I measured between these hat channels and then cut some bed frame to fit. I then welded them in place. Now for these angled pieces, I was struggling to figure out the exact angle to cut them at, so I had to come up with a solution, but I think it ended up working out pretty well. First I used some tape to figure out the placement of where I wanted these pieces to be. Then I clamped some pieces of wood vertically to the hat channels so that I could hold up the angle iron to the wood and get an accurate measurement of the angle. Yes, I could have measured this, but I was really tired that day and for some reason, the math just wasn't mathin' for me, so I decided to do this the old school way. It worked out well, and the piece fit perfectly, so I welded it in and did the same process for the other side. By the way, I want to apologize for the flickering you guys have been seeing in the videos over the last few weeks. I was using cheaper cameras to film, and they record in a .mov format. DaVinci Resolve doesn't really like .mov format, and so every time I exported, I ended up with this weird flickering issue that I was never really able to solve completely. Some people were saying it was frame rate issues and all this other stuff, and I tried all sorts of stuff, but nothing was working. I decided to stop using the cheaper cameras after this video, so hopefully this is the last video where you'll see that. And here I am back to templating again. This time, instead of just taping everything, I decided to use newspaper and tape that together instead. I thought that this would give me a more accurate template, but it just didn't work. So I gave up on trying the template and instead turned my attention to installing the side panels. By this point, I'd figured out how to install these on my own using ratchet straps, so I put my head down and got her done. Once I'd riveted the tops of the sheets so that they would hang on their own, I used another ratchet strap on the inside of the sheets to curl the sheet up and slide it in behind the rub rails. Now I should probably note that these sheets I installed on the inside of the rub rail, but they are on the outside of the body, so any water that runs down these sheets should drain away from the bus and not make its way inside. I also made sure to take into account which direction to install these sheets so that the overlaps would face toward the rear of the bus. This is so that when I'm driving down the road, any rain should be pushed past the seams and not into them, much like how shingles on a roof works. So at this point I had the sheets installed, but they were only held in with a few rivets on the tops. I did go back and install all the rivets properly, but you'll see that in another video. So I had this idea where, you know how on RVs they have stabilizers and they always say to not use them to level the RV? Well, each one of these jacks can handle up to 5,000 pounds and I got 4 of them. So if I'm doing my math correctly, theoretically these should be able to level this bus, but I won't know for sure until I try. Now I wasn't ready to install them here, but I thought I'd check and see where I might want to put them. So I did a lot of thinking on how I would do this front sloped piece, and I came up with a bit of a plan. Before that, however, I needed to rust-proof these spanning pieces, so I sprayed some primer on them. Next, I used a tape measure and a square to find the center of the bus and marked it using a pencil crayon. Why a pencil crayon? Well, because I found it in the bus and it was handy. After that, I marked the center of the sheet of metal that I was using. Now, getting the sheet of metal up by myself was pretty tricky. I ended up drilling some holes into the sheet of metal so that I could hook ratchet straps onto it and pull it up over the front of the bus. I made sure to line up the marks on the bus and the marks I put on the sheet metal so that everything was centered. So if you end up doing this, I would recommend that you get help with this. This took me a few hours to figure out and complete, but now that I know how to do it, I could probably do it in less than an hour, but this is one of those things that I had to figure out on my own. So if you appreciate the work that I put into this, I would appreciate it if you'd consider subscribing. It's not mandatory by any means, but it does help this channel grow, so if you want to, I would be extremely grateful. Once I had the sheet of metal where I wanted it, I welded it in the very center, and then used ratchet straps to pull down on the ends. This forced the sheet to curl around the shape of the roof. I then slowly worked my way from the center to the edges, welding as I went to hold everything into place. Now, I apologize because I didn't really film all of this, but I was in a rush to get this done this particular day, and setting up a camera takes time. But I did use a sawzall to cut off all the excess. The only thing I had left to do was fill in these side areas. So I measured the dimensions of the hole and transferred them onto some sheets of metal. So I kinda glossed over this just now, but I actually made a mistake with that first piece that I cut out. Somehow I got my measurements wrong and I had to redo everything, but I didn't want to film the same thing twice, so the piece you're seeing me install here is different than the one you just saw me cut out. Getting that sheet of galvanized in there was a pretty big challenge, but with the help of some ratchet straps and rivets, I managed to get it installed. Now it was at this point where I ran out of drill bits. Turns out that bed frame is made out of pretty hard steel and I kept dulling my drill bits, so I had to order some new ones. In the meantime, I turned my attention to the other side. This was basically the same process, but because of the doorway, the piece of metal was much smaller. So in last week's video, you saw my dad and I install this piece of metal at the very back. Now because of how much I went up by, I noticed that the whole back panel of the bus could be pushed in and out, so I welded some metal tabs between the hat channels and the sheet metal to add a little stiffness. Now, I welded the inside of the new section of the roof, but I still had to do the outside, but the welder didn't have a long enough cord to reach. So I put the welder into the bucket of the tractor and lifted it up to the top of the bus. So when I cut the excess off the roof with the Sawzall, I didn't really do that good of a job, so there was still quite a lot of leftover material and the cut is really wonky. So to fix that, I welded the top as much as I could and then used the grinder to smooth everything out. Now it wasn't a perfect solution, but it kinda worked. And yes, before anyone says anything, those welds were atrocious. If I could go back and redo anything on this build, these welds would be at the top of the list. I will fix a lot of this with body filler, but I kinda wish I didn't have to. And yes, it says Cool Bus. I know. Look, it was a request from a friend, and if you're seeing this, you know exactly who you are. So in a previous video, I mentioned how the rust proofing that I used on the floor wasn't exactly up to snuff, and I will be fixing that in this video. But first, I needed to move some wiring out of the way and do some cleaning up. Now that I had the roof raise done, I could hook everything back up that I had disconnected to make the roof raise easier. That finished, I swept up and vacuumed the floor to get it ready for paint. Now this is a full gallon can of chassis saver paint. So this stuff, when I bought it, starts at about $250 a can, but it's supposed to be the best solution for painting rusted surfaces. It contains chemicals that apparently convert rust into an inert material. It was surprisingly thinner than the rust paint I used before, so I was able to really work it into all the nooks and crannies that I had previously missed. Now, it came in a high gloss finish, which I'm not crazy about, but this is all going under a subfloor, so I didn't really care. Now, I had some leftover paint, so I thought I'd try painting over one of the rear windows to see how it would look. I don't know why I thought this was a good idea, but it didn't really hurt anything, so there it is, I guess. And that's all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, enjoy your day, and I'll see you next time. By the way, bonus points if you can guess what time signature this last song is in.